If somehow I can just convince you all that you all have the same problem, and we can just do this as group therapy instead of one-on-one therapy, it'd be really great.
Well, I'm excited to start jumping into sort of the second half of our feed here. I'm gonna sort of reset things here as soon as the clock ticks over the top of the hour to reorient the folks that are few folks on Clubhouse and then folks here in Zoom. I see Garris has joined us as well. Hey, Henry, good to see you guys on Zoom.
Yeah, if you're listening to us on Clubhouse, I'll add you in as speakers, but if you just mute while we're doing the weekly briefing, it'd be great. And then afterwards, if you have questions, we'd be happy to kind of jump back onto the thing. But what we're learning is if I include you as a speaker, then your followers will find out about it too. So as I send out these invitations, just feel free to join if you want to.
All right, with that, it's at the top of the hour, so I can do a little reset. So anyone that's on Clubhouse, do your little drag thumb down thing, which will notify any friends or followers that are on Clubhouse that you're here, you're in this room. For those of you here on Zoom, I want to say welcome. I'm going to stop my screen share so I can put my face up a little bit larger than the little tiny icon. And Tim, I'm going to spotlight you as well. So welcome to the weekly briefing. This is where Tim and I get together each week and really tackle whatever the latest hot button issue is. And yes, there is a bit of a method to the madness in terms of the issues that we go throughout the year. But right now, Tim, we're picking up sort of a part two, a continuation of this how do my numbers compare conversation that we got into last week. We're not going to recap, but do you want to give people a sense of what did we talk about last week, and then some of the questions that came up that we were wanting to unpack a little bit this week?
So this is what you just said. You don't want me to recap, but could you just tell me what we talked about last week? Isn't that a recap?
Yeah, just how about we don't want to do a complete recap.
Okay, good.
Just give us the log line.
That makes more sense. Yeah, I'll say maybe the easiest way to explain it is we were somewhat inspired by some questions that were asked of us, but the thought that RevThink, we look at people's numbers on a larger scale than obviously you individual business owners who could only see your splits and your numbers. So we put some numbers out there last week to just look and show people what we think is like a pretty good, I think we grabbed 20 random people and kind of put them out there of good case studies of what numbers might look like for healthy companies. We looked at the direct and indirect splits to show what that would look like in live action. And then we talked about this employee to revenue calculation. And I think that inspired a lot of people to start thinking differently. I got hit up in the community with many questions. I even made a side video for people in the live action industry. But I think everyone could benefit from it, honestly, just to see the types of decisions you can make using very simple numbers in comparison to other people. So I put that out there in the community too. You can find that in the discussion, or if you're in the live actioners subgroup, you can find it there as well.
So what's the opportunity, Tim, like for people that are asking these questions and they start to gain some insight, like give us a sense why should other owners care?
Well, listen, we're all in a marketplace, right? So we're buying and we're selling. And the way to stay in business is buy low and sell high. That's very simple. Or as I like to say, spend less than you make. That's how you can perpetually stay in business. So that basic principle is great. But what we feel like as creative business owners is there's more subjective nature. There are quote unquote investments that we want to make towards our business or our career. There's what we feel is industry practices or rules to, hey, we're giving money for this purpose, therefore we're supposed to spend it for that purpose. So that all that kind of starts putting restrictions on us of the types of decisions we make, and therefore the restrictions on your growth or your potential, or really just how you're going to push beyond the current stage you're in into a different stage of your career. So these numbers that we look at really starts giving visibility into how things might work for you. And different companies or individuals have to make different decisions with this information, but a lot of it, if purpose or direction or even, I spent an hour yesterday with Nico at Resonate, and we just made projections, like a whole bunch of what if scenarios using the same philosophy. And so many great scenarios can come out of who to hire and when to hire them and what you pay them and that kind of stuff. So that's what we're looking for, is the tools in the toolbox to start making your future become true.
So folks that are listening and watching, and of course, we always have a chat here available. So if you have a question or comment, please drop it as we go along, because Tim and I love to tackle things in real time. Tim, I will have to say, as a sales, like marketing, someone who's very passionate about those ingredients, I will say there is a little asterisk to your spend less than you make. If you flip that statement, you could also just make more than you spend. So let's not forget that. Right?
Well, what's funny is that's a perfect way of saying it, Joel. That's a great reminder too, is, the way I did the calculation last week, which is if you take the number of employees that you have and divide your total revenue by those employees, you'll have a whole number, this revenue to employee calculation.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of gave a scope or a scale of, like, you want that to fall between 200 and 300,000. There's a little bit more of a conversation with David Z. Baker's numbers, which honestly fit. If you ask me, I was 10,000 off, and I basically used the excuse of, like, it's easier to do my math than his at 180,000 instead of 200,000. Right. But the thought process is, like, there's a decision scope within that, right? If you're under 200,000, you have an opportunity, or you need to invest. You need to get more revenue to make up the difference. If you're over 250,000, closer to 300,000, you kind of have more revenue that you could reinvest into your company. So there's some decision points there. But to your point, Joel, if you could also do that same calculation as a multiplier and say, hey, with the number of employees I have, what I should be accomplishing or what I should be earning is, 10 times of what I'm looking at right now. And if that's true, you might ask yourself a question: what's slowing me down there? Is it my rates? Is it how I'm billing things? Is it how I present? Why am I holding myself back with this great, energy force we have behind me?
And I think maybe this is a bit of getting to the whole why it's cool. I think when we're able to share numbers and show people some comparatives, is I think there are some common narratives. Like Dominic brought this up when we were on Clubhouse in the last half hour of, well, as creatives, we're so inspired to, quote, put every dollar on the screen. And that sounds so lofty and, generous and so forth, but it's actually, it can be a failure in some respects. But my other thought too, is there's some common narratives that, like, I remember this one, I used to use it for a while. Well, we're not based in LA or New York, so therefore we can't charge that much. And once you start realizing, no, there's companies in Atlanta and Minneapolis and London and other places that are charging way more than you're charging. And then it just starts an interesting conversation called, well, why is that? And what do you want to do about it? But once you're given permission, then you're made aware of what's possible, it starts something in your brain that I think is really cool.
Yeah, perfect. It's not that there are ideal scenarios and we're all supposed to follow this one ideal, but there are opportunities and therefore choices you can make as a business owner. If there are other markets that will take your goods and you can make more revenue without increasing your expenses, that seems like a really good idea. In the US, it seems like we say the opposite. We say, well, if I could reduce my expenses and retain the same revenue, there's a gap there too, right? So we would outsource or do something else. To your point about marketing, is the goal often is like, why make it more difficult when you could actually go get more revenue or leverage your goods in a different way and present a higher value to your client and not work as hard for the same revenue. That's an easier way of thinking of it.
So I'm going to tell a quick little example, because I was dealing with this agency owner and she was asking the classic question of, like, well, how much should we charge for such and such project? And I said, here's a quick, very simple exercise. So I think in this case, it was something like, we're going to do this ad campaign. And in the old days, we're wondering, gosh, you think we could charge $40,000 or $50,000 for this? And I said, that's the wrong question, because you're thinking in terms of inputs. Well, my employees and the freelancers and the crew and the stock footage and the whatever, it's going to all add up to about 20 or 30,000. So we'll charge 40,000. I said, get into a conversation with your client called, hey, what's the result we're going to actually do with this thing? And if you know your client and you understand their space and you understand their business and you're asking really great questions, you're gonna start to hear things like, oh, so if this goes well, you're gonna generate potentially maybe $1 million worth of result, whether that's revenue or shareholders getting excited or whatever that thing is. And then I told her, a good place to start with your client is to say, I think there's $1 million worth of opportunity out there for you that we want to help you capture. I think a good investment to risk to generate that return is maybe 10%. So let's go after $1 million together. You pay me 100. And I think this is a pretty good, it's a good risk because we're experts at what we do. We kill it every time. You're not guaranteeing that result, but now you're starting to get into a different conversation rather than how do I just figure out what my inputs are, add a markup, right? Or production fee or whatever that is. And that's my number. So that's one little example I think is kind of fun to think about.
Yeah, it's almost the danger of producing a ratio is that people therefore they limit their billables, their total revenue or their price based off of this multiplier that somehow, Tim magically came up with a ratio where that if, and I tried to show this last week in the scope and difference of all the different companies, 20 different companies, not any two are necessarily alike. Like there's a simple range that we know 50 to 55% of the clients are doing indirect and direct splits. So we can get these certain numbers down. That's great. But if I work specific with some clients, I can get the indirect expenses up to, or I'll say the direct expenses down to below 50%, because what we're looking for is, and by the way, I'm not decreasing that expense. I'm not lowering my staff and lowering my salary. What I've done is I've asked for more money to do the same work. And one of the crazy things, Joel, is in order to do that, I actually had to not do projects. So if you use this thing like the splits, you say, oh, a client wants to give me a $15,000 project. It actually doesn't work. Like those splits that we're aiming for don't work with this project. We have to walk away from that, which seems so scary to the entrepreneur because that's where the money comes from. But if you take that 15,000, and there are people right now listening, I know I can see your name here, that you take the $15,000 project, the $30,000 one, you totally you're sabotaging yourself for the bigger project. And the 30,000 and the 50,000 that also came in are not getting the attention they need, and you're slowing down your business and you're slowing down your curve that way because you're worried about this petty little thing that's not going to make you the money anyway. So you don't have to work as hard and you can make more money. Seems like it should be a goal of the entrepreneur. Like it just feels like that's one of those items, because it gains this wonderful thing you and I both love, freedom. And freedom is where we can explore our own creative ways, find new adventures, become more of an influencer, the kind of work that we really want to do in our career.
Well, I'm smiling because you're triggering, right? Like scenes from my former life where the addiction to cash and got to take every project that comes our way because we just don't know where the next one's going to come from. And wow, there's so many places we could go with that, but clearly visibility into the future is a huge desirable goal. You also give me this really interesting thought, and that is, my 3 R's that I talk about all the time of the only reason you accept a project is how many R's does it hit on? Is it about the real, the relationship, the reward? And ideally you're getting all 3 of those. You just gave me a thought that I might be able to create a formula, or maybe someone smart like you could create a formula for the reward if X minus Y over Z kind of a thing that you say no. And it's sort of a minimum engagement type of a thought, but it's also just this, like, based on the splits that we have and the requirements of the job, taking this on, yes, we will get this amount of money, but it will actually not serve us in the long term. It's like a short-term give the client's giving you a fish. But if I could teach you, hey, take your eye off of the short term and put some time and energy into, let's go find those clients that do need the value you create, that will pay a much higher premium for what you do. That's going to create a lot of freedom if we can do that. But it takes some visibility called, hey, I've got 8 or 12 or 16 weeks of cash runway so I can make some of these calculated bets.
Yeah, and Henry Baker is saying along that same line, saying something too, is that when you create a project or accept a project from a client, you're also benchmarking yourself in that category in that
For
client's
sure.
mind. So that becomes another limitation that you're fighting against. Instead of being able to say to yourself, it's not worth being pigeonholed into these smaller categories. I think I can accomplish more. And I'll recognize that 15,000 actually is as a big client for some people that are listening, right? Because that seems like if I can get 15 grand in a 4-week period for one project, that would be ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it, but we just want to paint the picture that there are $100,000 projects out there, and there are only 24 hours in your day. So there are clearly people doing larger projects in the same time period that you're doing the smaller projects. And to understand what's different would be great. The season of your firm would help you kind of understand that part of it too.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I should pull up that diagram. Let me just also dignify what you were saying about Henry's comment, which I appreciate. I've had maybe 3 or 4 really cool stories. I won't go into the anecdotes, but over this past year of a client, so an owner who said, we said no to the $15,000 deal. And it's amazing how later that year, that same client came back and said, hey, now I've got 80. And is that enough? Can I afford you guys now? I'm like, wow, I freaking love that story, because it's that idea of, oh, if I'd taken the 15, I would have short circuited. I would have never had a shot at the 80. So I think there's some additional wisdom there, Henry. Tim, should I show the season things that you were referring to? Because it might be good just to mention, like, help people understand that there is this, we're doing $15,000 jobs here, but someday we'll be doing 100,000, and maybe someday we'll be doing $500,000 size jobs.
Yeah, we've recently learned this term .c. So depends on the client is what .c stands for. And Joel and I, when we talk about some of the scenarios we keep coming back to, well, yeah, but it depends. I mean, some of these answers have it depends on it, because it depends on a certain person's ability or desire or vision. That's a part of it. But that part of it is just like the season that you're in. And what I've learned is that you can be in these seasons of a creative firm, a startup, emerging, thriving, and mature. And there are certain things that seem to be, we'll say, globally true for people within each of these seasons. But when you're between the seasons, some of these numbers or some of the desires or some of the abilities kind of get crunched. It's kind of like a labor moment where you have to put a lot more effort into something to get beyond your startup phase into an emerging stage. And then when you're emerging, there's kind of like a moment of relief. It's nice, the tree is growing, but then we have to go prune that tree again. So in the next season, it can bear fruit again. And that pruning process really looks very different for people. And we want that pruning process to be as short as possible and be able to recognize the numbers are very different there. But working with my clients, I always put some vision or plan and forward of like, where are we going? And then honestly, like, is the mature stage right for everyone? Does everyone care to be a large firm? Is that worth your effort? Because sometimes it takes the cost beyond just dollars. It's cost of life and lifestyle and people and time and relationships that can be part of the payout there, or the payoff, or I guess, or pay down, or whatever the right pay is for that one.
Well, and I'll mention this too, that there are some firms that we see that don't necessarily grow size-wise, right, in this proportion, that go through these seasons. They're more the exception, but there are some mature firms that are quite small compared to most of the others in that same season. But yeah, I think this is a little bit of that roadmap. Like where did I start? Where am I going? Right?
Yeah. So let me throw this at you. So someone asked me, they did it in a private chat instead of the public chat. So I'll hold the name back just for a minute. But or if they want to join, I think they might be on this call. They want to join us and give more thought this way. But the question came up of like the use of freelancers. So there are firms out there that kind of really have a low staff, high freelancer ratio. And the thought process or the recognition there is that there are clearly, you can be successful in that space. So you don't actually have very much staff at all. Therefore, if you're doing this staff to freelancer calculation, it can be very off because you're using all freelancer.
Mhm.
So in that process, we had a conversation, which kind of comes to the point of the seasons there, Joel, which is, well, maybe this is the right season or time for you to do that. But here's the downside of only going freelancer is there's a retained knowledge in your business. There are people that because they come to work at the same place every day, they know how to do things and there's an efficiency to their time, but also they know the same projects of you, have done the same work, know the same clients. And that retention in your business, it's kind of like a savings account of your business that you can put away, you can save for use for a future day in this experience. The freelancer model, even though these are genuinely good people, very talented, can get a project done, that's not their business. Their business is to find the next gig. That's how they make their living. So to retain your goods, they're not going to retain their goods. What they're going to do is they're going to leverage the goods you taught them to get the next gig to make themselves more money. So that's part of our economy. But I think there's a balance of energy that you want to put into some folks that are in your business and retained. Therefore, that those ratios I gave last week, or that scale that I gave last week of like, really, if you're getting closer to that $300,000 mark, that's a time maybe to go back and grab another staff person. That's a retained person, another savings account, or basically another bank account that you're opening to you put a savings into that you can use for a future purpose. And that dollar to person conversion is a good conversion. There is absolutely a benefit and a freedom, flexibility with freelancers, but I find it very difficult. It's and all the companies I've had, and it's easily over 100 now. If I'm not getting close to 200 people, that 200 business I haven't talked to about this over the years, but it's rare, if never, that I can recall that someone could run their entire business off of freelancers. It's hard to pitch because you have to pay by the day to get some pitches done. You're paying for every lead that you've gotten. You're paid for every frame that is made. And that ability to leverage these goods in the marketplace is very hard. Joel, if I remember right, even you were even playing with that on the other end of impossible, which is, hey, maybe I can just be a rep for freelancers. And we had some people across the United States that you were doing, thinking that would be a good kind of leverage point.
Yeah, it wasn't. No. And it's interesting because now, having worked with tons and tons of businesses, like you were mentioning, the pattern that I'm seeing is at most, the really strong, thriving firms are about 50-50, right? Meaning there's about 50% artists that are staffed to 50% freelance. Once it starts to become more than 50% that is freelance, there's just different challenges that start to arise. And I think I would also add, for the larger companies, that's even more true. Like, it's one thing when you're, say, a creative director and an executive producer, and then you get a job and you hire 3 or 4 freelancers. Clearly, that's all freelance. But if you're a $20 million a year company and you land $1 million spot for Apple, you're not going to just say, oh, let's get the job done. Let's go hire 40 freelancers right now and not have any staff. Like, that would be insane. Well, why? Okay. If you think about the reasons why, you start to realize, oh, right, there is this retained value. Also, just imagine if somebody was going to buy your business and they walked in and they said, okay, great. Once I buy this and you hand over the keys and you walk away tomorrow, what's here? And if you said, well, all these people are freelancers, so tomorrow when you show up and you put the door in the key and you open the door, there won't be anybody here. That buyer is going to be like, wait, what is it I'm buying then? There's got to be some collective knowledge and insight, methods and so forth here that I'm buying. And a lot of it's retained in these people's heads, as well as in systems and routines. But
yeah,
something
no,
to think about.
that's exactly it. So that balance of freelancer and staff, and to be able to make that decision, see the decision, there's good reason and good seasons where those are good investments too, to go to freelancer. You're trying to up your capability. You have a unique proposition from a client that you need to go outsource to, or you're kind of in one of those seasons, between the seasons thing. And honestly, to make a long-term commitment to somebody at a high rate might not be the right time to do it, but you do need them, or like to have them for, like a permanent 5-month, 6-month period to see if you can't launch into something new. So that ability to not make that commitment, obviously a very good move for people, because you are trying to keep those ratios in place, and
Well,
not have too much of a commitment or too much of a burden on your shoulders as you're building your business.
I will say this, in the early years of my business, I was determined not to hire freelancers. So people might hear that and be like, wait, I thought you were kind of arguing the opposite. But in the early years, I just thought freelancers are way too expensive. And it took me many years before I actually started realizing they're only a little bit more expensive. And then I started benefiting, and I owe a lot to Mitch Munson, he was on Clubhouse with us in the last half hour, because he started to really help me understand and appreciate the injection of new ideas and fresh perspectives and totally new methods working with people outside of our local market and around the world. So there is a absolutely huge benefit. Don't misunderstand, I think, what I'm arguing.
Yeah, to me, like, I think what most of us are trying to do as business owners is understand the timing of decisions. So what we want to be able to do is be able to see something of a pattern, kind of put some guardrails on our decision making so we don't go too far out of the way. But then know like what that investment looks like, what that burn rate looks like. I think I might have pointed out last week, when an airplane takes off, there's a lot of energy used to get that plane off the ground. And then when it's flying, it's just simply flying, right? It's a very different sort of energy. The same will happen for you as you push through seasons or start your company. There's a lot of things you need to burn through, but you have to get to a point where you're coasting. And then when you're coasting, then you kind of wait for the moment, and then you burn again. Like go after something else that's accomplish something greater, or take on a bigger project, or push towards something more of freedom. But your value is kind of retained and contained in many of these decisions. And you, as the key decision maker, are the one that you have to have some sense of where to look. That's why I honestly think at RevThink, we have a lot of these things out there, the Creo S system where it's cash flow and production roll up and these numbered method. We use a lot of data, but I try to create the perspective like we use the data as a like a feedback loop for the decisions that are being made, instead of the data in order to make decisions. Like I just want to see, like, if you do something, what does happen? And then they ask the question, is that what we wanted? Should we try something else? I was working with a client today, and they were talking about developing a stage. Like they're going to go into a brand new 8,000 square foot place. And when it came down to it, the decision point was, how good of an entrepreneurs are you guys? So if you take on this burden, can you convert this one way or another eventually? And the fact that they are amazing entrepreneurs, like, well, then there's nothing to lose. Like you're going to make something from it. There's nothing to be afraid of. You can afford it. You have a long enough runway to get it off the ground. And then most likely you'll be making 20 times what you're paying in lease on that space. So that's what you want to add into this, is like, you're the entrepreneur, you're the one in control, and you want to do it. And then we Rev Thinkers don't want you to work for someone else. We want you to thrive in your own business. We want you to thrive in your own career and thrive in your own life. You don't have to live by these rules. If you can kind of understand what makes up the primary elements of these rules, you can guide this yourself. It's a master chef with a bunch of ingredients, or even just a fried egg. A master chef with a fried egg can make something amazing out of it. So we want you to be able to master your company the same way.
Well, I know we're going to run out of time here. We got about 2 more minutes. You reminded me, again, in the spirit of that, like, spend less than you make, or make more than you spend, whichever way you want to turn that coin. I'm thinking of an owner in Manhattan that I was talking to, and he was saying, yeah, we're paying $70 a foot for our space because of these increases. But because of the pandemic, I can get a space the same size right across the street for $30 a foot. And that's what I'm using to negotiate because of the changes. And it's that same question of, like, I know as an entrepreneur, I'm like, your business is already killing it. So getting into a space that costs half, that has all the same benefits, unbelievable. Again, if you're ready and willing to gamble called we're going to go back to the office and be together in the office in the next 6 months or year out of this 7-year lease. But it's somewhat of a similar equation.
Yeah. Here's my encouragement to wrap this thing up. We all we're living with data one way or another. Even if you're just looking at your QuickBooks files and looking at a P&L, all that tells a story. I'd encourage you to also kind of recognize the opportunities to look at things in certain ways. If you're using a production rollup or something similar where you can look at production actuals and, most important, cost remaining on a project, get a sense of what it's going to take to finish these projects. These are all opportunities to start asking a question of like, what decisions am I going to make? I like to point out, if you're a $2 million year company, you're making 2 million decisions every single year. So how do I get past those decisions and make them in bigger chunks, make them more efficiently, but also take advantage of all those decisions? I'm not stuck with anything. I can do something different every time I take on a project, every time I bring on a client, every time I bring on an employee. What are you going to do different? And your entrepreneurial effort, your entrepreneurial formula of needs plus resources equals solution is what's going to make you unique in the marketplace. And then finally, we're going to celebrate that, right? Joel's going to help you get the marketing out there, and we're going to make sure that everybody knows that this unique market, this unique position you are, is heard in that marketplace, and people recognize you for it.
It does get fun. Yeah, I love to get the word out there, help people get in touch with that. Like, what's that one thing? What's that one thing? All right, Tim, we should wrap it up and try and keep everybody to our 30-minute limit here. So I appreciate everyone who attended today. If you showed up for Clubhouse, we're also experimenting there. So be on the lookout for us over on the Clubhouse app. If you need an invite, just shoot me or Tim an email and we'll send you an invite. Tim, thanks for the chat. I got to jump onto a call with some folks down under.
Yep, very good. Thank you all. Appreciate you, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, everyone.